Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, if you're in my class right now, you are assigned to do 6 problems. You are given some time to work on it. When the timer went off, I said we are going to go over them on the front board. You are going to use these as notes, so make sure you write down what I write down, so that when you have an assignment at a later date on how to add and subtract fractions, you'll be golden at it. You'll be awesome sauce. Now our first step we've got to do is we have to find a common denominator. So to find our common denominator, we'll list our multiples of our denominators. 12, 3, 6, 9, 12. Look, I found my common denominator is 12.
Good.
Then I have to change both of these fractions so that they have a denominator of 12. I have to change both of these fractions so that they have a denominator of 12. You're following along with me and writing this down, please. Even you following along and writing this down, please.
Oh, yeah.
No, I was talking to the people at home. Then I ask myself, Jake, 12 times what equals 12? 12 times 1. Then I multiply straight across, and 5 times 1 is 5. Then I ask myself, Jake, 3 times what equals 12? 4. And Jake, what is 1 times 4? 4 12ths. I make sure I know what the sign is. It's an addition sign. So now I have 5 12ths plus 4 12ths, which gives me what, Jake? 9 12ths. But guess what? 9 12ths can be simplified. Well, how do you know what to simplify it by? Well, let me remind you. I'm going to list my factors of 3 and my factors of 9. I'm going to find the biggest one they have in common, which is 3. I divide both my numerator and denominator by 3. And the answer to that first problem that you got should be 3/4.
Wait.
Yes, ma'am.
It's 3 and 9.
You're right. I messed this up.
Yeah, I thought it
Not
was
3 and 9, 3 and 12.
2.
Please forgive me if you're watching in Bermuda. 3 and 12, thank you.
Yeah.
1, 12, 2, 6, 3, 4. Still is 3, and it simplifies down to 3/4. Make sure you have all of this written down so that you don't. Our next problem is 2/5 plus 3/7. The first thing we have to do is find our least common denominator. Now, if I were doing this just myself, I would probably look at a multiplication chart, see the 5s and the 7s, and see what shows up in both first. But in the effort to give all the teaching to you all, I'm going to do my multiples of 5. And I'm going to stop because I know where it stops.
Yay.
And if you looked at your multiplication chart, you would see the first one that shows up in our multiples of 5 and our multiples of 7 is 35.
Okay.
Which means I have to change 2/5 into something over 35. I have to change 3/7 into something over 35. So once we find the common denominator, we change both fractions into a fraction with that common denominator without changing the value. Without changing the value. So if I ask myself, Lena, what do you multiply by 5 to get 35? 7. If I multiply my denominator by 7, I have to multiply my numerator by 7, and Lena, 2 times 7 is? 14. Then I ask myself, Lena, what do you multiply by 7 to get 35? 5. If I multiply my denominator by 5, I must also multiply my numerator by 5, and my new numerator is what, Lena? 15. I make sure I know what the sign is. This is an addition sign. So I have 14 35ths plus 15 35ths gives me 19 35ths. I'm going to check and see if I need to simplify it. Now you have those notes in your journal. If you're, yes ma'am.
14 plus 15 does not equal 19.
It equals 29.
Yes.
So why are you telling me 19 then? Equals 29 25ths. Man, my brain's not working today, is it?
Yep.
I need to see if I can simplify 29 35ths. So I'm going to list my factors of 29, my factors of 35. I'm going to see what they have in common. 29 is prime, so I know it's only 1 in 29. 35, I know it's 1 in 35. I know it can't have 2 as a factor because it's not an even number. I know it can't have 3 as a factor because the sum of the digits is not a multiple of 9. 5 and 7 is 35. My greatest common factor is 1. That means this is in lowest terms already. Yes, ma'am.
Why do we have to simplify?
Because that's what the instructions say.
Okay.
Because I don't want to see
So the answer,
91 80ths when you can just put 1/2.
so the answer is
29 35ths. So write these notes down.
I got it.
The next problem I asked you to do was 1/6 plus 3/4. The first thing you have to do is find a common denominator. So we list our multiples of our denominators. So if I go 6, 12, 18, if I go 4, 8, 12, oh look, 12 is my least common denominator. Once I know my least common denominator, I change both fractions so that they're over that least common denominator. And I need to do that without changing the value of the fraction. And I ask myself, Bryce, what do you multiply by 6 to get 12?
2.
And if I multiply my denominator by 2, I want to also multiply my numerator by 2. Why? Because 2 over 2 is equals 1. And if I multiply something by 1, I'm not changing the value. I'm changing how it's written. And so, Bryce, 1 times 2 is? 2. Then I ask myself, Bryce, what do you multiply by 4 to get 12? If I multiply my denominator by 3, I must also multiply my numerator by 3. Bryce, what is my new numerator? 9. I make sure I check the signs. It's addition. Bryce, 2 12ths plus 9 12ths is? 11 12ths. And I know in my notes, it already says if the numerator is 1 less than the denominator, it can't be simplified. You have that in your notes, so you can't simplify that. Make sure you get it all written down. Our next problem, we start with 3 subtraction problems. So we have 3/4 subtract 1/8. My first step, I have to find a common denominator. So I list my multiples of my denominators. 4, 8, 12, 8, 16, oh boom, 8 is my common denominator. You'll get to, once you see these quite often, you're going to get to be able to pick out the common denominator pretty easily. We're going to change 3/4 into something over 8. We're going to change 1/8 into something over 8. That's already over 8, so I'm just going to leave it. Then I ask myself, Abigail, what do you multiply by 4 to get 8?
2.
So if I multiply my denominator by 2, I also want to multiply my numerator by 2. Because 2 over 2 equals 1, and I'm multiplying it by 1. So Abigail, what is my numerator? 6. So now I look, and this is a subtraction problem. So the only difference is instead of adding the two numerators together, we subtract. So 6/8 minus 1/8 is 5/8. 6/8 minus 1/8 is 5/8. Let me check and see if I can simplify it. I list my factors of 5. It's prime, so it only has 2 factors, 1 and 5. I list my factors of 8, because that's my denominator, is 8. And we have 1 and 8, 2 and 4. The only thing they have in common is 1. If that's all they have in common, then my answer is already in simplest terms. So I am done on that one. Make sure you have this written down. It's good notes. My next problem is 1/4 minus 1/7. Or find the difference of 1/4 and 1/7. Isn't it 1/4 minus 1/7?
No, it's 8. Wait. No, it's 1/4 minus 1/7.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so I could use my multiplication chart to find the least common denominator for 4 and 7. So I ask myself, Blake, what is the least common denominator for 4 and 7? $28. Very good, Blake. So then I ask myself, Blake, what do I multiply by 4 to get 28? Awesome, 7. If I multiply my denominator by 7, I must also multiply my numerator by 7. Because I'm multiplying this fraction by a fraction that equals 1, which doesn't change the value. And Blake, 1 times 7 is 7. Blake, I ask myself, Blake, what do I multiply by 7 to get 28? 4, excellent. If I multiply, I did it right here too. If I multiply my numerator by 4, I must also multiply my denominator by 4. So then I ask myself, Blake, 1 times 4 is? 4. I go up and I check. This is a subtraction problem. Blake, 7 28ths. Subtract 4 28ths is? 3 28ths. Now I need to make sure that I cannot simplify this. So I list my factors of 3 and my factors of 28. 3 is prime, so the only factors it has is 1 and 3. 28 is not prime, so 1 and 28, it's even. So I know it's 2 and 14. I know it's not, 3 is not a factor because 8 plus 2 is not a, is 10, which is not a multiple of 3. 4 and 7, 5 isn't, 6 isn't. So now I look.
Oh wait, never mind.
Okay. I look, the only thing they have in common is 1. If 1 is the only common factor they have, then that problem is already in simplest terms. My next problem is the difference between 9/10 and 1/4. 9/10 and 1/4. I need to find a common denominator. So I ask myself, Reagan, What is the common denominator for 10 and 4? 40. Anybody have a different one?
I got 20.
20. Either one would work. Since I called on Reagan, let's check. Let's use hers. So I'm going to change 9/10 into something over 40. I'm going to change 1/4 into something over 40. Reagan, what do I multiply by 10 to get 40? 4. 10, 4. And my numerator now is?
40.
9 times 4? 36. Reagan, what do I multiply times 4 to get 40? 10. If I multiply my denominator by 10, I must also multiply my numerator by 10. And 1 times 10 is what, Reagan? 10. I make sure I know what the sign is. It is subtraction. And then I ask myself, Reagan, what is 36/40? Subtract 10/40? 16. 26/40. 26/40. Now I need to see if I can simplify it. So I write my factors of 26 and my factors of 40. 1 and 26, 2 and 13. That's it. 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. They have a 2 in common, which means I can divide both my numerator and denominator by 2. 26 divided by 2, I can look here. 26 divided by 2 is 13. 40 divided by 2 is 20.
Oh, 13. Yeah, I got that.
So
too.
13/20
I got that too.
is your simplified answer. Boom, shakalaka, peace out. God bless, love you. Do something kind today. Subscribe and save the
Bye.
bees.